grab the northern lights. Baby, you just kick your feet up while I kick back. I roll one with you by my side.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Bold, Black, and Addicted to Bravo, because I am bold, black, and addicted to Bravo. I'm so excited to bring another episode for you guys. It's a little bit of a heavier topic today. We're talking about domestic violence in the Bravo world, just because there have been some arrests and, some housewives in the past we want to get into. So I have two great guests joining me today. And I just realized I didn't even introduce myself. If it's your first time watching, my name is Nyemade, or that African butterfly, as I'm known on social media. Ladies.
Hi, I'm Diana Kalyndee. It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me again, Nyemade. It's always a pleasure talking with you. I run my Instagram account, Diana Kalyndee. I also am the host of the Believe in Bravo Besties podcast.
And I'm Kalyndee from the Housewives Heretics podcast, which I co-host with my angel bestie, Josh.
Thank you. And thank you both again for joining me. Normally we do like a game before, but I felt like this one wasn't really a game before topic, So what really triggered this was that Mike from the Shaws was recently arrested under some domestic violence charges. I'm going to let Diana give some of the details about that and if you don't follow her, you should. She has like a little news thing, and that's where I get my Bravo news from. I just go to her page. So I'll let her fill us in on what's going on with Mike.
Thank you. Well, I have everything pulled up on here on page 6, just so we can give credit to where credit's due. But March 27th, he was arrested for, let me get the full name of the charge because I want to get it right. And of course, I just scrolled past it. Okay, so it's intimate partner violence with injury. He was arrested by the LAPD. And the important part about that, page 6 says, it's used when there's visible injury on the victim. So they arrived at that arrest charge because there was a visible injury on the victim. I also want to point out that the article does not come forward and say that Paulina was the victim, but because she's engaged to Mike and it's a cohabitant, an intimate partner violence, like we can kind of assume that Paulina was the victim in all this. And if we're wrong, someone let us know. So yeah, it's a felony charge. He was given $50,000 bond, which that's a pretty significant amount of money. And he's got to go back to court on July 25th.
Do we know if this is his first time having an incident like this?
I think it is his first time. I'm not 100% sure on that one, but the article on the other articles that that I've read, they don't mention any prior arrests for domestic violence.
Okay, right. That's good. Kalyndee, what was your reaction when you heard?
I was obviously sad and shocked because I feel like it's happening more often. Like we just had the Miami one with Peter, Alexia's son, and obviously people have been talking a lot about Louis, Teresa's fiance. So it's just sad to see people that we watch with such prominence that are doing terrible things.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because you never want to see it. Part of me wonders if it's happening more, or if people are just getting better about reporting it. Because unfortunately, domestic violence is one of those things that's been around for so long,
right?
In so many cultures, and it's excused, and so I'm at least happy that people are getting authorities involved when it happens and trying to get help.
Yeah, absolutely.
About reporting it, because I was just going to say, maybe even if they did report it, the people on these shows come from very affluent communities. They're usually prominent names in their respective communities. So I'm wondering, even if they did report it, if it was maybe shoved under the table somewhere and there's just incidents we don't know about.
I mean, I'm sure there absolutely is. Like, that's the one unfortunate thing that you can count on, is that money can buy silence and buy innocence and people to turn their heads, which is really, really unfortunate. I don't like to think about the terrible things. I mean, Jeff Epstein, like it's with enough money, you can get away with almost anything. What did you guys think about the reaction from the Bravo world? Because I swear every single thing I clicked on said disappointed but not surprised. But like I was a little surprised. So I was
Yeah.
like, what did you guys think?
I don't know if I was surprised because I just watched Shaw's recently. I got into it and started watching all of it, and seeing how controlling he was of his ex-wife, Jessica, you can see definitely some abusive tendencies. I don't know what happened behind closed doors with them, obviously, and there were never any charges or anything like that. But, you know, usually.
I agree, Kalyndee. I was gonna say how you mentioned Jessica and you could see the abusive tendencies. I also thought of the dinner with Paulina and Paulina not showing up and him calling her and kind of trying to control the situation. And every time they have an argument or he's accused of doing some wrongdoing, he always has a way of gaslighting whoever he's with to weasel his way out of the situation. And I'm someone, I haven't been physically abused, knock on wood, thank God, but I am someone who has suffered from mental abuse in prior relationships. And I saw all the warning signs coming from Mike. Like I remember just some things he would say to Paulina and or Jessica. It was like hearing things back in a speaker that I've heard before.
Yeah, I think I definitely saw the emotional abuse side of him. Like that I think was clear. I don't know. I just didn't really get physical violence from him. And I usually, especially because I grew up around it, like it's like a trigger for me. Like if I watch movies, like certain ways that I feel like you can tell when you're seeing like a couple where there's physical domestic violence, just like the way like their body language is, even if it's like one of those guys who are like super friendly to everyone else, because everyone thinks like, oh, abusers are super mean, horrible people, but often they're like the most charming people. They're the nicest people to everyone but the people in their household. So like, but usually if you see the couple together, you can kind of get that sense. But I just didn't really ever get that from him. Like emotional abuse, I just didn't feel the physical. So I was surprised that he's physically abusive. But then I guess people usually escalate sometimes. So
yeah, I think it also goes back to what you said about how abusers can be the charming type, because I feel like in society, we do throw the word narcissist around a lot. But the real key about narcissistic abuse, like they're charming, you know, they know how to get people on their side. So that's where you said you could see it escalating. I definitely see that it just went further from the component of mental abuse to like, all right, well, the next step, unfortunately, for him was physical abuse.
Yeah, that's really unfortunate. And it's sad to hear about, especially also like you mentioned Alexia's son, or no, Kalyndee mentioned Alexia's son that we just heard about. That was down in Miami. For those who haven't watched, if you haven't watched, you should. It's on Bravo now. Miami was really good. Did you both watch this season?
Yes.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. But yeah, what did you guys think about Peter?
Obviously not surprised because he's had things in his past like this. Reading the details, because with the mic arrest, we don't have all of the details yet. We don't know if there was drinking involved or if it was the neighbor that called, you know, all of that we do know about Peter. And I was horrified.
What were the details?
For Peter? So I think they had been drinking and they were fighting, and they had gotten to such a bad physical altercation that she had tried to run out the door, and he had dragged her back in, and they were saying that he was like kneeing her in like the pelvic region and things like that. And then she ran out again, and a neighbor intervened and took her in and called.
Horrible when I was reading it. Because that's not really like I just lost my temper and hit you. That's like for brawling, which is appalling.
Yeah.
And it got dismissed.
Yeah.
Did he dismiss it though? Or
so they dismissed it because they said she was not compliant, she didn't with the case. So basically she didn't show up for hearings and stuff, which is what happens so much because obviously these people, it's a cycle, or not even pay them off. Like these men or women can be very manipulative, and obviously they have a lot of control over you. So between the report and a hearing, that's a long time. Like Diana said, Mike isn't due in court till July. a lot
Right.
can happen, you know?
Right. You can
And
Paulina warm her up, and then she could drop everything. And so yeah, same with this Peter situation, which is just, it's horrible. And getting out of an abusive situation is so hard. They say it takes an average of seven tries before someone leaves a abusive situation for the final time. So
Wow.
yeah.
Many guys. Oh my God.
Yeah. It's a lot. And then they keep going back, and usually it escalates. That's just saying, like, even that being like that's usually, very rarely is that the first time someone's got physical with someone where it's at that level, especially a man to a woman. Like an average man who doesn't hit a woman who like snaps or whatever is like a hit. It's not like a dragging you in and like fighting with you. Like that speaks to more like long-term violence, I feel.
Yeah,
absolutely.
The thing that worries me about it being dismissed is Alexia. How do you guys feel about how she deals with Peter?
I think that the way she deals with men in general is pretty toxic. The same with his father, she took up for him. And I don't know if you watched the documentary, I think it was Cocaine Cowboys, which was his story. And even the first time he got arrested and the police came to the door and she answered it, and she totally took up for him. She basically, they said they were looking for someone, and they said his name, and she said, I don't know anyone by that name. And they said, well, isn't that your boyfriend? What do you call him? And she's like, babe. So like you're a genius, but scary genius, so and this isn't Peter's first violent attack. So I feel like that she's taking this dismissal as vengeance, like it's hearsay, like it didn't happen, and not actually dealing with the very real problem.
I agree completely. It was brought up this season. Her now husband, Todd, who's also from Staten Island, like shout out Homeland. He brought up, he said, you enable Peter. And I wonder, because obviously the way we treat other people, it's all reflective of how we were raised and our relationships growing up. And, we know a little bit about her life. So I'm just wondering, like, how this all plays into it. And, obviously she has very different issues with Frankie, and she has to take care of him. So I wonder if there's also some guilt of like, okay, I have all my focus on Frankie and making sure he's okay, and like wondering if she feels guilty that she can't provide the same support for Peter. But I just love Todd for sitting her down and saying, hey, you are enabling him. Yeah, it did cause an all-out brawl, and you could see her loyalty was to her sons, which in some respects it should be. But with Peter's history and knowing that, like you said, this isn't a first-time offense, he's had plenty of trouble with the law and I think he's had other violence issues, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he attacked, was it a homeless person?
Yeah, a person.
Yeah, that's right. This is clearly some sort of pattern for him. At what point as a mom, regardless of all the guilt she's feeling, does she have a come to Jesus, so to say, and be like, all right, maybe the best thing for my son is not to defend him, to let him face the consequences and, go forward.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I think it's a mix of what you both said. I think it's a mix of her like upbringing and the way that she just like defends men in general. And then I think it's a mix of like the guilt, like for everything that Peter has had to go through, because the accident affected all of them,
Right.
And I think she feels some guilt with that. But like you said, when you enable someone and you allow them to keep having like that bad thing, like you're helping lead to a potentially worse situation. So it's kind of like, what is better? Like, do I talk to him now and let him face the consequences now? Like, instead of letting him off with the homeless person situation, like if she had really, I know he talked to his grandmother, but like if he had really like got help, anger management, and I don't know exactly what all of like the responsibilities he had to do with, but if she like just encouraged him to really see like a real therapist and like really try to delve into those issues, maybe it wouldn't have then escalated to where it is now, because I'm sure he's also given that he said his grandma was the main person that he talked to, and then she passed away, like that's even more, whatever he's feeling, it's even more on him now because that was his person to speak to. So while she feels like, she's helping him by being like, oh, it's not that big of a deal and blah, 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 she's actually just laying the groundwork for it to get worse and escalate worse. And then what are you going to say? Like when he really hurts someone, or God forbid, like someone, dies or something, then it's like, oh man, I wish I had taken it seriously like 5 steps ago and let him be mad at me then instead of now. Not saying that he's going to escalate.
No, absolutely.
No.
Yeah.
But no, you're totally right. It's terrifying. And where his dad, I think, grew up with his dad in prison. I think that adds guilt to her too.
Yeah.
I mean, she's had a tough life. Like,
definitely.
it's hard
She's
to
been through it.
critique her because it's like you want to as a person, but then you're also like, but man, she's had to deal with so much,
Yeah. How do you survive all of it?
Yeah, but somehow she does. Do you think that sometimes women or people go on these shows purposely, like knowing, like even though like you would think someone who's in like a bad situation with their marriage would like maybe not want to be on it to cover it up because they'll try to portray their marriage as being like really great. But do you think on some level they're going in it to get out of it? Because with Taylor, I don't know, did you guys watch Beverly Hills in the beginning?
Yes.
So with Taylor, we later found out that her husband was abusive. But he was abusive before they went into the show. And that was one where I wasn't surprised. Like when I found out, like the signs were definitely
all there.
But I feel like, and I think she may have even said once that she went into it hoping it would get better. But I sometimes wonder if they go into it hoping for a way out.
Yeah, I think she definitely went in hoping it would get better, but then obviously for another salary and a backup plan. And she said that it made him more angry and lash out more on her. And I do think it's because obviously abusers want control, and a big part of abuse is isolation. So when you can isolate and control the narrative and then charm other people around, they're not going to question as much. But then not only is she in a social group there that she has to see 3 to 4 times a week, she gets to see them alone.
Yeah.
So that takes away a lot of his control. So it makes sense that he got more angry and more aggressive, unfortunately.
Yeah. I would assume he would also blame her for how he was portrayed because nobody liked him. And then they were comparing him to like Mauricio. Like I remember there's one where like Mauricio's like making lunch for Portia and playing with her in the pool, and they like did a side by side of Taylor's husband like not even knowing how to handle his daughter. So I'm sure like, that made him even more upset with her.
He asked if Taylor microwaved the can of cinnamon rolls.
Yeah.
You both bring up very good points. I would also argue that maybe they go on the show because they don't think anything's wrong and they think this is just like typical for their marriage, because in some cases of abuse, not that they don't know something wrong is happening, but they're just so desensitized to it. And it's like, all right, well, sometimes my husband gets mad and he hits me, and that's just our marriage and that's our normal, So they might go on to the show thinking it's their normal. That's not going to be on TV anyway. So like, I should just do this anyway.
Yeah. And that's a good point too, because wasn't it, I want to say it was Portia in Atlanta. He wasn't abusive physically, but I think it was one of those where like she didn't realize there was such a problem with their marriage until they like got on the show and people were like, girl, he's way controlling.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a really good point too. I think that it helps to put that microscope on it.
Yeah. And especially if they grew up with domestic violence, that warps your view even more of normal. So
yeah, especially if it's in a setting where the mom thinks it's okay. Like it's one thing if you grow up and the mom is like, this is bad, but if it's, especially, I would say it's almost, I don't want to say it's worse, because growing her up around physical domestic violence is awful. I can tell you that. But I think that it's even more likely to repeat itself when it's like verbal and emotional abuse, because it's like everywhere around you is going to tell you that your dad hitting your mom is, you know, wrong and bad. But like if you're home and your dad's like calling your mom like an idiot, it's like, and you hear like, oh, people argue, couples argue. You may not register that like that's abuse that he is speaking to her that way, especially if your mom doesn't do anything about it, you know? So then it's easy then to get into a relationship with someone who speaks to you the same way.
That's such a good point. I can relate to that on such a smaller level because my family, unfortunately, the way we communicate is by yelling at each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me until maybe going to college to realize that like most families don't scream at each other when they're trying to get a point across. And even though we're very loving and we're not abusive in that sense, like it's just we're loud, we're passionate, we scream, and that's not normal. So now like I'm trying to, with my future children, God willing, break the generational curse that is yelling is effective communication.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's like most communities, but you know, I think of especially the Black community and the spanking, the whooping, everything's like you're gonna get a whooping. It's like, you know, you don't have to beat the children. Like even if it's something that's been done over time, like we're at a stage now where we understand like, is it like, are they even rationalizing it? Is it abuse? Like we don't, just because it's been done generations and we've been told that it's okay and it's been called spanking, it doesn't change the fact that it's still abuse. And I think that that's something to talk about even within this conversation, because if a grown adult hits another grown adult to show them that they did something wrong, we instantly are like, that's abuse. But when it's to a child, it's like, oh, that's discipline.
Right.
Like how is hitting someone even more smaller than you and helpless discipline when you wouldn't do it to an adult, you know?
Yeah, definitely. It's still being used as a consequence for alleged misbehavior.
Right. And then they'll often say like, you know, oh, well, it's because you can't rationalize with a kid and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, if they can't rationalize that like what they did is wrong and it's an accident, or, you know, like the that it was wrong or the consequence of it, then how are they rationalize you hitting them? Like they're just having the person they love hit them. Like they're like, if you can't logic out what they did wrong and have that conversation, then they're not logicking out the spanking. They just know that you're hitting them because you're mad. So abuse again.
Yeah, I actually did a reel recently on when Gia mouthed it off to Marge, and I said, like, if I were to do that, I would have gotten the wooden spoon, you know, like that was our thing in the Italian culture. You get hit with the wooden spoon. And it's amazing how many cultures, like people of different cultures came forward and was like, oh, la chancleta, like, oh my God, like everyone had their own wooden spoon.
Yeah.
It's like crazy when you put that in perspective. And like I've mentioned before, like my parents are such great parents to me, but I wish that they would have realized that like that's not, you know, just because it's something they probably grew up with too, it's not something that makes it okay. So that's again, another generational curse I'm trying to break.
Yeah. But I mean, I like that we're able to recognize it because like my mom spanked me too when I was younger until I got to a certain age. And it's just like, I mean, I don't want kids, but I wouldn't, you know, spank them. But I like that we're at least recognizing it and trying to make it better. Because I think, you know better, you do better. And I can't too harshly judge the generations of the past where it wasn't talked about as much and there weren't studies. It was just, you did what your parents did. So I don't judge them as harshly as like maybe more people now who know better and still choose to do it the other way. But, you know, to each his own.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree.
So something that I think is hard sometimes with domestic violence is that, you know, like I mentioned, usually the abusers are like super friendly and super nice and charming and all of that. And then there's also, I feel like, something to be said about rehabilitation, like someone making a mistake and having like a one-time thing or whatever. But it's like, how do you wrap that around dating someone who you then find out has a past? It's like, you know, like, do you say, like, if they come to you and they're charming and they're like, hey, I have this record, we had this one horrible fight, it was awful, things got out of hand, I'm so sorry. Like, do you forgive that and say, that's not the person I see? Or do you say, it's a warning sign and I'm, you know, no, thank you? Because in the Bravo world, we see Sheena and Brock on Vanderpump Rules kind of dealing with that. And then we see in New Jersey, Teresa and Louis dealing with that. So like, what do you guys think? Like, how would you navigate that?
I think you need to be hyper vigilant if that situation were to come forward, and everyone's boundaries are different. So one person might be like, this is an absolute deal breaker for me, and they're well within their right to say that. And someone else might be like, I think everyone deserves a second chance, and they're also well within their right to say that. Where it becomes a problem, and I think we do see this with Teresa and Sheena, is that they're both the personalities to get swept away in the romance of it all, whenever like a new flame comes forward. So I would hope for them that they do sit down and do the work. I know it's probably a really big ask for someone like Teresa, who I love, but I don't think she's going to be doing any inner work anytime soon. She could prove me wrong.
Yeah.
They really have to get real about what they will tolerate and what they won't tolerate, and do their due diligence about when would be an appropriate time to get out. I have a friend who is like in a clear narcissistic relationship. This is her third time getting back together with him. And I remember we all kind of sat down with her and we said, like, you need to set your own boundaries and not tell him. And if he doesn't come forward, then that's your chance to get out. And it's just also, I don't think she's willing to have that look, because sometimes people are just like Teresa, like Sheena, they're afraid to be alone. They want that fairy tale ending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think the men or women, whoever the person is, are so good at selling them the story and vilifying the other person. Like when Louis was like, oh, you can't trust her, she tried to stab her ex or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They are so good at selling this narrative that even though they could have done something bad, they were still somehow innocent or validated in doing that.
Yeah.
And they come on so strong with this love bombing. So why would Teresa think that he was so violent that he like assaulted someone in a road rage accident, or one of his ex-girlfriends, when every day he's writing her cards and giving her all of these affirmations? Mm-hmm. And, you know, her experience is genuinely different. And I think that's just very, very hard. And poor thing, I think she's just going to end up like Vicky, like, and Brooks, where he's just building it up to make the switch. And I hope I'm wrong, because I do love Tree and I want her to have the happiest life.
Me too. She is another one who's been through so much. I just want her to be happy and loved. The woman drives me insane, but I want the best for her.
Yes.
You know? I think
before we go on for a second, can I add one more point?
Yeah.
I did a theory about why Teresa is so protective over Louis, and I spoke a little bit about what we did now, where I said she just wants that fairy tale ending. She's like looking past, and an actual victim of domestic abuse commented, and I could tell she was coming from a hurt place because she attacked me, and she's like, how dare you say she just wants a happy ending? She's just protecting an abuser. And it got me upset because, like, first of all, everyone's abuse story is different, right? It's never all like, there's no format, there's no table of contents. And for this person who did come forward and say they were a victim of abuse, to discredit, you know, my abuse and my, like, sometimes where I've been in emotional things where I'm just like, well, I don't want to give up the happy ending, this might be my person, so I'll bear with it. Like, for me, I think that's a very valid reason for someone to want to stay. So, like, I blocked that person because I am ultra sensitive this week. I must be PMSing. But it's just like, it's just mind blowing. And also I have an immense amount of compassion for them. I could see what kind of place they were in. But my whole point of that is just like, everyone's story is different. And I think with a topic like this, we need to be mindful that, you know, it's not going to follow one specific pattern or format.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Everyone's story is different. And we all have like the basic bare minimum blueprint of what it looks like you want to look for, but it looks different with every situation. I think that you made a really great point about the fact that, yeah, when they're being love bombed, and when they're having a different experience, like their experience is going to be different to what the ex-wives and the ex-girlfriends say. And so to them, it's totally believable that, like, oh, there's this one time, I had a coworker once who he was one of the managers, and he had actually a record of it, and I had heard of it because at work everyone hears that business about everyone else, but he was like the nicest guy. Like we would do like assets, that was our group, and we do like projects and like employee engagement stuff, like so nice. So like, and you would think also with my background that I would be, and I am a little bit like sensitive to it, but not so much when I get the charming version. Like I can, sniff out like the asshole version, but this charming version, it's harder to be like, oh yeah. So even knowing that, I was like, well, maybe it was like just a one time, this, whatever. Him and his wife ended up moving to California, and like the day before Thanksgiving, he killed her. Like, yeah. And it was like this huge thing. And so now like the girl and he like ran away and tried to come back to Florida. And they had to like hunt him down. Like it was horrific. And I was just like, it was shocking to me. And that's even knowing that, domestic violence was on the record. I saw it. So, and I just was like, oh, he's great as like a person. So I'm sure, and he was cute. We were all like, oh, he's so cute, because he was. So I'm sure like if you have that coming at you being schmoozy and nice and love bombing you, and he's like, oh, it's just this one time, like I could totally understand being like, okay, it was just the one time, like not, and then not realizing until you're deep in the relationship that he's actually abusive.
Yeah, and Teresa is.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. I was just gonna say
I was gonna take the topic somewhere else, so I don't want to.
Okay. Yeah, you're fine. I was saying, Teresa is surrounded by misogyny. And by people with tempers. She has a temper. Her dad had a temper. Her brother has a temper. So I think that even more so, when she's seeing Louis love bombing her and all of this, but she could still see in her mind, like, yeah, we all get angry sometimes, of course,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I was going to say off the love bombing remark, look at Lala and Randall. A pet peeve that I have is that people like to call her a gold digger and say that she was, oh, well, he gave her a Range Rover. Look at his looks. Like she knew he was married. I'm going to open up about this. I was in a similar situation where someone who was married came to me and was like, I'm getting divorced. First it was like, my wife is dying. Then it's like, I'm getting divorced. Like spun a whole different thing to me when it was a completely different reality. So nothing grinds my gears more than people saying she knew he was married, because like narcissists, love bombers are so good at taking the situation and flipping it around to where you could be being told an entirely different truth and eating it like a freaking cream puff. Like they are so good at playing roles. So with Lala, I would bet my money on it that she wasn't doing this to be a gold digger. She thought they were getting divorced. She thought they were separated. Mm-hmm. And you could see the hurt when she talks about, like, she wouldn't have had a child with anyone that she thought would do this to her. And he was living a completely different life.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I've been there before too with the like, oh, well, we're separated. We're getting a divorce. Like the paperwork isn't final, but we're divorced. And you're like, oh, okay. Because it's believable. I want to know now. I'm just like, call me when the paperwork's done, because
literally
I'm not going to be in that middle spot anymore.
Let me see the judge order.
She's like, you have to be like, show me the divorce decree. And now
you do, because they'll just be like, oh, it's just coming. And your mind is like, okay, they're separated. Like we know like divorces sometimes take a while and they're basically done, but I don't trust anyone anymore. So.
Wasn't it Kimora Lee Simmons though? Her husband or ex-husband faked one?
Yeah, he faked
a divorce decree.
He was still married.
So you just can't trust anyone.
Like, you just can't believe anybody about anything anymore.
It's awful.
They're out here creating fake divorce papers.
Yes.
Yep.
The men are menning.
Yeah.
Hardcore they are. I forgot what I was gonna say, but yeah. So yeah, I feel for those women. I think your point about Teresa and the fighting or the arguing is a good one, because I was gonna say, at least not as much with Brock. Like I see his controlling side. I don't know that I see hints of domestic with him, and you guys can tell me if you're wrong. But like with Louis, I can see the hints of like, oh, I could see it going there.
Yeah.
Just like the way he speaks to her and certain things. So I feel like if I knew, kind of like what you're saying, Diana, about being extra vigilant, like if I knew that they had this history, I would be like super alert for the warning signs. So like when I look at Teresa and Louis, like those warning signs have gone off for me and I'd be out. I don't know if I feel the same way about Sheena. Well, I do feel the same way about Sheena and Brock, but do you guys feel that way also?
Yeah, especially the way his anger escalates, I think, is what is scary to me, and always wanting to control the narrative and all of that. Because obviously you see that in Louis, but amplified, because I genuinely think Louis is such a narcissist that he thought he could fool America. I thought he's so charming and he fools everyone in his regular life, whether it's clients, business partners, girlfriends, whoever, that he was like, no problem. I got it. And then when things weren't going his way, that's when he flips and is like, we're not filming this, get out, all of that. But Brock, I think, is just not as seasoned in it, honestly.
He's a baby narcissist.
Yeah, it's just a baby narcissist. And so he's still working it out. And I think it's so hard for Sheena and Teresa and any woman, because even if you're hypervigilant and looking for the signs, I would want to reach out to the woman, the ex, and be like, can you clarify for me? Can you give me your side? But then, this guy that you're madly in love with is going to see that as a betrayal and flip out. So it's really tough to break out of.
It's tough either way. That's why, like, even as we dissect and talk about these situations, like, I don't judge them. Like, you never know what you'll do in someone's shoes. And even people who would say like, oh, I'd be out. Like, I was in a relationship where things weren't going good. It wasn't like that bad, but I wasn't happy for at least the last year to year and a half of it. But I stayed because it was like, I've already put in 3 years. Like, do I want to give up like everything now when it could get better? And we're all told like, work through the problem. So I don't judge people in these situations, because you'll never know what you would do until you're in it.
That's such a good point. Kalyndee, when you said you thought that Louis thought that he could fool America, I got chills. Like, I literally was like, oh my God, like that's so right. For me, with Brock, it's not as obvious as Louis, but I would argue that his scary tendencies come out when he fights with other people, not Sheena. Look at the way he spoke about Lala.
Yeah. And that's a huge trigger for me too, is how they argue with other women.
Yeah.
Like,
and the mother
is like a huge sign as well.
And Sheena's
oh my
mom.
God, the way he spoke about Sheena's mom was trash.
From that moment, I didn't like him. From the moment, I was like, oh no, you're trash, talking about someone's mom like that. Like,
that takes care of your children, or your child, full time.
It's not even your money that's paying her to call her an employee. I couldn't. I was disgusted. Yeah. But I mean, like I said, it's such a hard situation to watch and to see. And, I never want to see any of the women in situations like that. Did you watch New York? Do you think Jason ever got that way with Bethany?
Yeah.
Or do you think he was just more of a jerk?
Like physically violent, or like control? I think definitely controlling and all of that, because if I chronically rewatch all of these, so I'm like always recently just saw all of them. But the way she changed, even when she started dating him, and even when she did the I'd Rather Go Naked campaign, and she was so excited to text him the picture to give him a preview, because she felt hot, she felt confident. That's who she is. And he was like, don't text me like that on my work computer. Don't like always just undermining her and her success, which was, I think, a big threat to her, to him.
I remember when she had like landed her deal and like the wedding pictures came out, and like she was so excited about this like multi-million-dollar deal, and he's like, you know what's even more important than that? Our wedding pictures. And like made her look through the wedding photos. And I was like, okay, but like this is a huge deal too. And not that the wedding pictures aren't a huge deal, but it's like, this is her moment, and that work is super important to her. And I just remember that like at first everyone was like, oh, Jason's amazing. But then like as it went on, I was like, no, Jason, it's not all that great there. You can tell. So when the things got really, like out of control with the divorce, I wasn't super surprised.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Well, he got really scary when the divorce started rolling around.
Yeah. Well, I wish all of the women the best and none of these bad or violent situations. And I'm sorry that we have to see it as viewers, but also glad that we do because it opens up dialogue, it gets people talking, and sometimes those conversations are needed, even if it's just to discuss, warning signs and things like that. So I'm glad we had the conversation. I thank you both so much for joining me this evening. I
Yes.
appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. And
Absolutely.
I agree. And I think that sometimes watching it on our TV screens, you can be nicer to these people that you look up to than people in your real life. So you're not always as patient with your friend or your parent or, the person close to you that's experiencing these terrible, violent or abusive things. And so be kind and be patient.
Patience is huge. And remember, 7 is the average time it takes to leave. So I know, Diana, when you said your friend's on her 3rd time back, hopefully it doesn't take to 7, but if it does, and that's the thing, is because it's like, where do you find the line between loving them and wanting to be that safe space for them, but then also wanting to give them like the tough love, like, okay, like that's enough. Like,
Yeah.
it's hard.
I had a conversation with Emily Hanks on my podcast one time. We were talking about Summer House with Kyle and Amanda and how like Paige had to be the role of like, she's heard it all before and she has to throw her hands up in the air and be like, all right, whatever you want. Now, I have no evidence that my friend's physically being abused, knock on wood. I know she's mentally being abused. So I think if it were to be that worse and I had hard evidence, like I would go in there, I'd run from California to where she lives and like drag her out of there. But yeah, like sometimes you also have to be like, you have to let people learn in their due time. Like it's hard. You don't want that for them, but sometimes the only way people are going to learn is through their own way through it.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you all again. I will try to remember to include in the comment section information for abuse helpline that you can contact if you or someone you know needs help. And have a great day.
Roll one with you by my side.